Hello and welcome back to another episode of Mystery Red Reads. I am your host, Mystery Red, and this is my disclaimer. This beta read in concrete is at the author's request. This video is for learning purposes. Today we're looking at a piece of original fiction. We are back with Ladybugs88, and I am looking at Chapter 8 of The Lake of Haunted Memories. I have a playlist for all of my reads for Ladybugs, so if you'd like to check those out, you can just view her playlist. And with that, I am not going to do a recap. I am literally just going to dive right in here. The Chapter 8, we are with Howard. The garage door descended behind them, shutting out the light outside the car. Okay, so I hate to stop straight out, but we have out and outside. It's not a huge deal, but I am going to note it. I'm just going to note it. They have similar sounds. And we are going to try it again, and we're going to keep going. Right now, I'm just trying to observe it so that, well, one, because my brain gets hung up on things that I don't say, worrying that I need to say them, or I should have said them, or that a few lines from now I'll regret not saying them. And it's just how it works, and so we're gonna accept whatever it gives us. Whether or not you change anything about that is entirely up to you. The garage door descended behind them, shutting out the light outside the car. You could say from the car, and that would resolve it. Wait until I've brought the wheelchair around, Howie, Liv said, her first words since leaving Sparkling Lake. Tyson had also kept unusually quiet during the drive home. Sure, after all that coughing, Howard's voice scratched, adding his throat to his long list of body parts that hurt. But he refused to complain. He'd caused enough bother for one day. Or do you want your medication first? Liv could probably tell from his voice how much pain he was in. 51 years of marriage had made him transparent to her. Sadly, the converse wasn't true, and Howard still couldn't guess what she was thinking if his life depended on it. For instance, what had she told the girl at Sparkling Lake? Something Liv didn't want him to hear, but what exactly? Please? His neck stiff and sore, Howard couldn't turn to look, but the pills rattled in their plastic container as Liv popped the cap and water swished in the plastic bottle she handed him. It read okay. It's a little bit long, this line. His neck stiff and sore, Howard couldn't turn to look, but the pills rattled in their plastic container as Liv popped the cap and water swished in the plastic bottle she handed him. So we've got like three actions. I'm inclined to want to break this into at least two sentences. His neck stiff and sore, Howard couldn't turn to look, period. He heard the pills rattling in their plastic container as Liv popped the cap, and water swished in the plastic bottle she handed him. So there's a suggestion. It's a subtle change. Basically, I'm gonna note my comment here. Suggest breaking into two sentences potentially ending here, then starting with, how did I say that? I like how I said it. Now, can I remember how I said it? His neck stiff and sore, Howard couldn't turn to look, period. He heard the pills rattle. I think that's pretty much the only change. He heard the pills rattle in their plastic container as Liv popped the cap and water swished in the plastic bottle she handed him. Yeah, it was very, very small change. Since the time years ago when he'd accidentally exceeded the allowed dose, she never let him carry the pills himself. You could say them here. I think maybe would be acceptable if you didn't want to say pills again so soon. It's not a big deal, but just to observe it, just to say we noticed, you could say them. Okay. He hadn't done it on purpose. How could he have? How could she think he would do that to her? In a moment of relentless, excruciating pain, Howard had simply lost count and taken an extra few. She placed a pill. Yeah. If we're going to have mention of the pills multiple times, you probably good that we're observing it. I don't know. When I flip flop and get wishy washy because my brain wants to argue with itself, it's like, okay, yes, there was more than one. Do we really need to mention it? Maybe. We're not sure yet. That's why we highlight it so that we can observe it as we continue on. And then we realize if we come across it a third or a fourth or a fifth time, we probably need to think of some other ways to say what we're trying to say. And I'm going to leave it at that. She placed a pill in his palm and he pushed it into his mouth, the water washing down the bitterness of the memories that accompanied that name they hadn't heard or spoken in 52 years. Gosh, I almost want to put emphasis on that. Like, it's a style choice, but I almost want to see it in italics. I'm just going to note that as a reader that I kind of want, or as a fellow writer, I kind of wanted that for us to put emphasis on the word that name. And we're going to keep going. 52 years of trying to wipe the lake from their minds, as if that were possible. Why had the name resurfaced now? Was this the golden jubilee of tragedy delayed by 2 years? His father hadn't lived long enough to celebrate his own 52 years of tragedy. He'd only lived for 19 years after his attack. I'm wondering if I think it'll be okay if you just say 19, but then you're in writing, so I don't know. I like your clarity. I don't know. Could muse that out. Here's what because it's an incomplete thought. Let me try to make sense. Why had the name resurfaced now? Was this the golden jubilee of tragedy delayed by 2 years? His father hadn't lived long enough to celebrate his own 52 years of tragedy. He'd only lived for 19 years after his attack at the lake, having died in August 1967, alone in his room at the Mendota Mental Health Institute. The same day when Howard's life changed forever, 200 miles away by the shore of the cursed lake. So you have years three times, and I was kind of wondering if you could just omit 19 here, and we could try it. I could try reading it without it to see if it's still implied that it's years by just saying the number, because we have the years prior and we are following that idea that we're speaking of years and numbers. Why had the name resurfaced now? Was this the golden jubilee of tragedy delayed by 2 years? I'm also going to note we have tragedy twice, but I think that you're doing kind of a playback, his golden jubilee of tragedy and 52 years of tragedy. So I'm letting it go because of your use of it. We are talking about years, but we do have 3 of them. So I'm inclined to want to omit like the word years and just say 19 after he'd only lived for 19 after his attack at the lake, having died in August 1967. So we know that in this paragraph we're talking about the passage of time, so I feel like it's implied that the 19 is in reference to years, and it might be okay to just drop it, and then that's an easy fix to having it 3 times. You'd have to toy with it. I'm just going to observe it, and we're gonna roll on. Let's see. Liv opened the passenger side door. She squeezed Howard's hand and the muscles in his neck softened somewhat. He yearned for the medication to take effect and the pain to subside. Any time now. Dizzy, he closed his eyes, hoping it would stabilize him, but the darkness only reminded him further of that day. A hand had pulled him out of his early grave and back to the surface through the leaves, the blood-soaked dirt, and the bodies of his fellow loggers. The hand had wiped his face so he could reopen his eyes, and he had found his father... He found his father's eyes. I'm going to read it the way it is and kind of already know that I don't want eyes the second time. It's like already... Okay, let's taste it the way it is. The hand had wiped his face so he could reopen his eyes, and he had found his father's eyes looking down. His father, who at the same time lay dying 200 miles away at Mendota's in Madison. Now, if we omit the second eyes, does it read just as well? Let's see. The hand wiped his face so he could reopen his eyes, and he had found his father looking down. His father, who at the same time lay dying 200 miles away. Peering in... He had found his father's eyes looking down. He found his father's, met his father's, found his father peering down at him, or met his father's gaze. I don't know. I'll stop. I'm going to stop myself from going down a rabbit hole of fidgeting, flip-flopping, and being indecisive, because it's frustrating not just for you guys, but for me. So I'm going to observe that it's here twice, and you might want to toy with this little part right here just a little bit to take away from that echo. It's not, you could have it, I'm inclined to believe that you've done this deliberately, but I kind of think you can do better in this part right here by reworking it so that it kind of says what you want it to say, but without the duplication on eyes. If I could try to explain why I'm inclined to want that, it has to do with how I feel when I'm reading it. The hand had wiped his face so he could reopen his eyes, and he had found his father's eyes looking down. His father. I think because we have his father, and we have his father. But I like the way that you've done it. Like his father's looking at him. And this is like reminding the reader that his father's at home at the mental asylum at this very moment, dying. So I've got exactly the impression you want, but we have the echo on his father, and we have the other one on his father here, which I would keep, but I would let go of the other one, if that makes sense. Like I wouldn't do this replication and then this replication and then this replication and this replication. I would do, because it seems like feels like it's too much for one sentence. It's kind of a long sentence. I think it's going to read better for you if you omit one of the two eyes and then keep the rhythm on the father. We're going to keep going. Howard hadn't hallucinated his father's presence and wouldn't otherwise have escaped his premature burial. No one else had survived who could have helped him. And somehow he'd traveled to the highway where a driver had stopped after having almost run Howard over, lying alone and unconscious, sprawled on the blacktop. Oh my gosh. Okay, so really he kind of pulled himself out? Because we know that his father is for real dying. So it's not really his father. It's almost like it's an apparition of him. Or maybe his father's already died, or his father has left his body, but he's not a material, if that's the case, he's not a material being to pull Howard up out of the, out from being buried underneath bodies and logs. So Howard has kind of pulled himself out in a stupor, like he's not with it. He's kind of having this apparition as he kind of fumbles through is kind of what I'm getting. Oh my gosh. Okay. Somehow he traveled to the highway where a driver had stopped after almost running him over. Okay, so you've got Howard here, and we know we're with Howard. I think that you're saying Howard again because we have mention of his father, and we're trying to be very clear who it is. But if his father is like dying at the inn, I'm pretty sure I'm going to know that if you said him here, that it will be Howard we're talking about. Let's just try it out and see. Howard hadn't hallucinated his father's presence and wouldn't otherwise have escaped his premature burial. No one else had survived who could have helped him. And somehow he traveled to the highway where a driver had stopped after almost running him over, lying alone and unconscious, sprawled across the blacktop. Okay, we don't have another him in that sentence. I kind of want it to be him. I feel like it's interchangeable, but if I saw him, it would have pulled me a little bit closer, and therefore I'm inclined to mention it. When I put a question mark, it just means I'm not completely decided. So I'm just going to put him, maybe. In his nightly conversations with his father, or dreams, as Liv insisted on calling them, Howard had asked about that day. Old Arthur replied that once Lake Chevanet entered someone's life, it would never leave. The legacy remained and would pass on to the next generation. In a way, it was a good thing Liv and Howard had no children, because that was the legacy he wouldn't have liked to pass on to his worst enemy. And he hoped the lake wouldn't find anyone else to carry its tragic burden. No one could deserve that fate. I'm loving this. I'm loving it. Okay, I'm totally engrossed. What is, what happened with the thought process? It's interesting to be in Howard's mind for a second. He's remorseful of the whole thing. I am going to note we have more than one sentence starting with and so I'm just going to observe that. It's reading really well. A nice clean chapter. Good, good, good. Moving on, getting insight from Howard. Okay, it looks really good. Very few things to suggest there. I'm enjoying it. I'm going to go ahead and start my next video to do chapter 9, and I will see you guys next time on Mystery Red Reads.